I never thought I'd see Adam Chun standing in my doorway again, let alone looking like he'd been hit by a freight train. The rain had soaked through his jacket, and his usually perfect hair hung in damp strands across his forehead. His eyes, which I remembered as cold and calculating during our college years, now held something I'd never seen before: desperation. "Peter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I have no right to ask, but I need help. Comment below where you're listening from." I wanted to slam the door in his face. This was the same guy who'd made my freshman year a living hell, who'd cornered me in the library to mock my stutter, who'd convinced half our dorm that I was a freak. Adam Chun, star of the debate team, golden boy with the sharp tongue and sharper cruelty. The last person I ever expected to see broken on my doorstep. But something in his posture stopped me. His shoulders sagged with defeat, and when he looked up at me, I saw genuine fear flickering behind his dark eyes. "Kenneth threw me out," he continued, his voice cracking. "I've been staying in my car for 3 days. I don't have anywhere else to go." Kenneth, his boyfriend of 2 years, the one I'd seen in his social media posts looking perfectly polished and happy. I'd always wondered what it would be like to be loved by someone like Adam, even as I hated myself for the thought. Now here he was, admitting that even that picture-perfect relationship had crumbled. "Why me?" I asked, gripping the doorframe. "After everything you put me through in college, why would you come to me?" Adam's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked nothing like the confident bully who'd tormented me. "Because you're the only person I know who might understand what it's like to feel completely alone." He paused, swallowing hard. "And because I owe you an apology that's about 8 years overdue." I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to protect myself, to remember the humiliation, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep because of his words. But looking at him now, soaked and shivering, I saw something that made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. One night, I heard myself saying, "You can stay one night, and then you figure something else out." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it made my stomach flip. "Thank you," he whispered. "Peter, I thank you." I stepped aside to let him in, immediately regretting the decision as his familiar scent filled my small apartment. He'd always smelled like expensive cologne and confidence, but now there was something softer underneath: vulnerability, maybe, or just exhaustion. As he stood dripping in my living room, looking around at my modest space with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in my design work, I felt a strange flutter in my chest. This was Adam Chun, the man who'd made me question my worth, now completely at my mercy. The irony wasn't lost on me. "The couch pulls out," I said, grabbing a towel from the linen closet. "There are blankets in the basket." He took the towel gratefully, our fingers brushing for just a moment. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through me, and I pulled back quickly, disturbed by my body's reaction to someone who'd caused me so much pain. "Peter," he said as I turned to leave him alone, "I meant what I said about the apology. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm not the same person I was in college." I paused in the doorway, not trusting myself to look back at him. "We'll see," I said quietly, then escaped to my bedroom, my heart pounding with a mixture of old hurt and something dangerously close to hope. Comment below where you're listening from. 2 weeks had passed since that first awkward night, and somehow we'd fallen into a routine that felt both foreign and strangely natural. I'd wake each morning to the sound of Adam moving quietly around my kitchen, the gentle clink of dishes, and the soft hiss of something sizzling in a pan. The smell of coffee and whatever elaborate breakfast he was preparing would drift under my bedroom door, coaxing me from sleep with an intimacy I wasn't prepared for. The first morning, I'd emerged to find him standing at my stove, shoulders tense with uncertainty, scrambling eggs with the focused intensity of someone trying to prove their worth. He'd looked up when I appeared, his eyes searching my face for any sign of regret about letting him stay. "I hope you don't mind," he'd said, gesturing toward the plate he'd prepared. I figured I should contribute somehow. That first breakfast had been stilted, both of us navigating the strange territory of sharing space after years of carefully maintained distance. But as the days passed, something shifted. Adam's cooking became more adventurous: French toast with cinnamon and vanilla, perfectly poached eggs over avocado toast, even homemade pancakes that rivaled anything I'd ever had at a restaurant. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" I asked one morning, watching him flip what looked like a restaurant-quality omelet. He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Kenneth never cooked. If I wanted to eat well, I had to figure it out myself. There was something in his voice when he mentioned his ex-boyfriend's name, a careful flatness that suggested deeper wounds than he was willing to reveal. I worked from home, designing logos and websites for small businesses, which meant I was acutely aware of Adam's presence throughout the day. He'd claimed the small dining table as his base of operations, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear as he made call after call searching for work. I tried to focus on my own projects, but I found myself stealing glances at him when I thought he wasn't looking. This version of Adam was nothing like the person I remembered from college. Gone was the swagger, the cruel smirk that had made my stomach clench with dread whenever I saw him across campus. This Adam was quiet, almost careful in how he moved through my space. He folded his blankets each morning, stacked his dishes immediately after eating, and seemed genuinely grateful for every small kindness I showed him. It was disorienting, watching him transform my solitary apartment into something that felt almost like a home. He'd started buying groceries without being asked, somehow intuiting my preferences and expanding them in ways I hadn't expected. My refrigerator, usually stocked with takeout containers and energy drinks, now held fresh herbs, real butter, and ingredients I couldn't even identify. "You don't have to do all this," I told him one evening as he cleaned up after another elaborate dinner. He paused, dish towel in hand. "I know, but I want to. It's the least I can do." There was something in his voice that made me look at him more carefully. The Adam I remembered from college had been all sharp edges and casual cruelty, but this man seemed worn down by life, softened by whatever had happened with Kenneth. When he thought I wasn't watching, I caught glimpses of a sadness that ran deeper than just a recent breakup. The strangest part was how comfortable it felt, having him here. I'd lived alone for 3 years, fiercely protective of my space and my routines. But Adam moved through my apartment like he belonged there, anticipating my needs in ways that should have felt invasive but somehow didn't. He'd learned that I liked my coffee strong and black, that I worked better with music playing softly in the background, that I got cranky when I forgot to eat lunch. Without making a big deal of it, he'd started leaving a sandwich by my computer around noon, or bringing me a cup of coffee when he made one for himself. "You're different than I expected," I found myself saying one afternoon. We were both working at opposite ends of the living room, the comfortable silence broken only by the sound of typing and the distant hum of traffic. He looked up from his laptop, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "Different how?" I struggled to find the right words. "Just different. From college. People change," he said quietly. "At least, some of us try to." There was weight in those words, layers of meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to unpack. But I found myself wondering what had happened to transform the person who'd once made my life miserable into someone who seemed genuinely concerned about whether I'd eaten enough vegetables. The evenings were the hardest part. After dinner, when the day's work was done and we were both tired, we'd end up on the couch together, watching whatever was on Netflix. Adam would curl up on his end, careful not to encroach on my space, but I was hyper-aware of his presence. The way he laughed at stupid jokes, how he'd glance over at me during particularly ridiculous scenes as if we were sharing some private joke. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something that made my chest tighten with an emotion I wasn't ready to name. When our eyes met, he'd look away quickly, but not before I saw something that looked almost like longing. It was dangerous, this growing comfort between us. I kept reminding myself of who he used to be, the casual cruelty he'd shown me when we were younger. But it was getting harder to reconcile those memories with the man who made sure I had fresh coffee every morning and asked about my day like he genuinely cared about the answer. If this story hits you, drop a heart in the comments. The breakfast ritual had become something I looked forward to with an intensity that scared me. Every morning, I'd wake to the sound of Adam moving quietly around the kitchen, trying not to disturb me. The smell of bacon or the gentle sizzle of eggs would drift into my bedroom, and I'd lie there for a few extra minutes, listening to him hum softly to himself. It was such a domestic sound, so different from the harsh laughter I remembered echoing through college hallways when he and his friends would corner someone weaker than them. When I finally emerged, he'd already have coffee ready. Not just any coffee, but the expensive blend I kept hidden in the back of my cupboard for special occasions. He'd learned my preferences without me saying anything, adding just enough cream to turn it the perfect shade of caramel. These small attentions felt more intimate than they should have, like he was memorizing the details of my life and filing them away as important. "Morning," he'd say, glancing up from whatever elaborate creation he was working on. His hair would be slightly mussed from sleep, and there was something vulnerable about seeing him in the morning light, before he'd had time to put on whatever mask he wore for the rest of the world. I found myself studying his hands as he cooked, watching the careful way he flipped pancakes or the gentle precision with which he seasoned eggs. These were the same hands that had once shoved me against lockers, that had crumpled my homework and thrown it in the trash while his friends laughed. But now they moved with such tenderness, creating something beautiful just for me. The contradiction made my chest ache with confusion. Our conversations during these morning meals had evolved from polite small talk to something deeper. He'd ask about my current design projects, and I was surprised by how thoughtfully he listened, asking follow-up questions that showed he actually understood what I was telling him. When I mentioned struggling with a particularly difficult client, he'd offer genuine advice, not the dismissive comments I might have expected from the Adam I used to know. One morning, as I watched him carefully arrange fresh berries on top of French toast, I realized I was staring at his mouth. The way his lips curved slightly when he concentrated, how he'd unconsciously bite his lower lip when he was trying to get something just right. When he looked up and caught me watching, neither of us looked away immediately. The moment stretched between us, charged with something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. "You don't have to do all this," I said finally, my voice coming out rougher than intended. "The cooking, I mean. You're not you don't owe me anything." Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. "I know," he said quietly. "I want to." The simple honesty in those 3 words hit me harder than any grand gesture could have. This wasn't obligation or guilt driving him to take care of me. It was choice, and that realization sent a dangerous warmth spreading through my chest. As the days passed, I found myself inventing excuses to stay in the kitchen longer, to extend our morning conversations. I'd linger over my coffee, asking him about his job search or sharing stories about my work. He'd clean up slowly, our movements creating a careful dance around each other in the small space. Sometimes our shoulders would brush as we reached for the same thing, and I'd feel the contact like an electric shock. The worst part was how natural it all felt. Coming home to find him reading on my couch, looking up with a smile that seemed genuinely happy to see me. The way he'd pause whatever he was doing to ask about my day, listening with the kind of attention that made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. It was everything I'd wanted in a relationship, but never quite found, and it was coming from the person who had once made my life miserable. One evening, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch sharing a pizza, he told me about his recent breakup with his ex-boyfriend Kenneth. His voice was careful, measured, like he was choosing each word deliberately. "Kenneth said I was too closed off," Adam admitted, staring down at his hands. "That I never really let him in, never showed him who I really was." He wasn't wrong. I wanted to ask why, but something in his posture warned me off. Instead, I found myself saying, "Maybe you just weren't ready then." He looked up at me with those same eyes that had once been so cold, now soft with something that looked like gratitude. "Maybe," he said quietly. The conversation shifted to safer topics, but I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. The idea that Adam had been hiding parts of himself, that his relationship had ended because he couldn't be vulnerable, made me wonder what other secrets he'd been carrying. It also made me think about college differently, not just as a time when he'd been cruel, but as a time when he'd been struggling with something he couldn't name or face. That night, I lay in bed listening to him move around the living room, getting ready for sleep. I thought about the boy who had tormented me and the man who now made me breakfast every morning with such care. They were the same person, but the transformation was so complete it felt impossible. People didn't change that much, did they? Or maybe they did, and I'd just never been close enough to anyone to witness it. I was falling for him. The realization hit me like a physical blow, making me sit up in bed with my heart racing. I was falling for Adam, the same person who had made my college years a nightmare. The person who had laughed when I'd been humiliated, who had treated me like I was less than human. But I was also falling for the man who remembered how I liked my coffee, who asked about my dreams, who looked at me like I mattered. The internal war between my memories and my present reality was exhausting. Every kind gesture from him felt like a betrayal of my younger self, the boy who had cried himself to sleep after particularly bad days. But every cruel memory felt like a betrayal of the connection we were building now, the tentative trust that was growing between us. I was terrified of being foolish, of letting my guard down only to discover that this gentleness was temporary, that he'd revert to his old self once he no longer needed my help. But I was equally terrified of missing something real because I was too afraid to let go of old wounds. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I could hear him settling onto the couch, and I wondered if he was lying awake too, wrestling with his own complicated feelings about our strange situation. The thought that he might be as confused as I was should have been comforting, but instead it only made everything more complicated. The next morning felt different from the moment I opened my eyes. Adam was already in the kitchen, but instead of the usual sounds of cheerful breakfast preparation, I heard only the quiet clink of a single coffee mug. When I emerged from my bedroom, he was sitting at the small table with his hands wrapped around his cup, staring out the window with an expression I couldn't read. "Morning," I said carefully, noting the absence of any cooking smells or the elaborate spread that had become our routine. He looked up at me with tired eyes. "Hey, I made coffee, but I wasn't sure if you'd want." He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "I didn't know if you'd want me to cook today." There was something fragile in his voice that made my chest tighten. "Adam, what's wrong?" He was quiet for a long moment, then set down his mug with deliberate precision. "I've been thinking about what I said yesterday. About Kenneth, about being closed off." His fingers drummed against the table. "I keep thinking about how you looked at me when I told you that." I poured myself coffee and sat across from him, suddenly aware of how small the table was, how close we were sitting. "How did I look at you? Like you were trying to figure something out. Like you were seeing something that scared you." He met my eyes briefly, then looked away, and I realized that maybe I haven't been entirely honest with you. About why I'm here, about why I needed to get away from everything. Comment below where you're listening from. I have a feeling this story is about to take a turn that hits closer to home than either of us expected. My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" Adam ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his tell when he was struggling with something big. "The thing about Kenneth." "Yes, he said I was closed off, but that wasn't the whole story. The real reason he left was because he said I was still hung up on someone from my past. Someone I'd hurt so badly that I couldn't let myself be happy until I made it right." The coffee cup felt heavy in my hands. "Adam, he was right." Adam's voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been carrying this guilt for years, Peter. About college, about how I treated you. Kenneth used to get so frustrated because he said I'd go quiet whenever certain songs came on, or when we'd pass by the campus, or when I'd see someone who reminded me of." He swallowed hard. "Of you." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You never said anything. All these years, you never." What was I supposed to say? His laugh was bitter. "Hey, remember me? The guy who made your life hell for 4 years? I was wondering if you'd forgive me so I could finally move on with my life." The words hit me like a physical blow. "So that's what this is about. You're here because you need closure so you can be happy with someone else." "No." The force of his response made me jump. "God, no, that's not." "Peter, Kenneth and I broke up 8 months ago. I've been carrying this around for years, long before I met him. It's not about moving on from you. It's about—" He struggled for words. "It's about the fact that I can't stop thinking about you. That I never could." My hands were shaking now. "What are you saying?" Adam stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "I'm saying that everything I did in college, every cruel thing, every time I went out of my way to make you miserable, it was because I was terrified of how I felt about you. I was 18 and scared and so deep in denial about being gay that I convinced myself that if I could make you disappear, if I could make you hate me enough, then maybe these feelings would disappear too." The room felt like it was spinning. "You're telling me that you tortured me because you had a crush on me?" He turned to face me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I'm telling you that I was a coward who hurt the person I cared about most because I was too scared to face who I really was. And I've regretted it every single day since." I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? Do you know how many nights I went to bed wondering what I'd done wrong? Why you seem to hate me so much?" "I know." His voice broke. "I know. And I'm so sorry, Peter. I'm so fucking sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it." The words came out louder than I intended, years of buried pain finally finding their voice. Sorry doesn't take back all those times you shoved me in the hallways, or made jokes about me in front of everyone, or that time you. I had to stop. The memory of him laughing with his friends while I stood there humiliated still too raw. The time I what? He asked quietly. You know what you did? No, I don't think I do. Tell me. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. That party junior year. When you told everyone I was probably a virgin because I was too weird for anyone to want to sleep with me. You said it loud enough for half the party to hear, and then you just walked away laughing. Adam's face went white. Oh God. Peter, I left that party and cried in my car for an hour. I continued, the words pouring out now. And you know what the worst part was? Part of me wondered if you were right. If maybe I was too weird, too awkward, too much of a mess for anyone to ever want me. You weren't. His voice was fierce now. You were never any of those things. You were kind and smart and funny and so goddamn beautiful that it hurt to look at you sometimes. That's why He stopped, running his hands over his face. That's why I had to tear you down. Because if I didn't, I was going to do something stupid like tell you how I felt. And that would have been so terrible. For me? At 18? Yeah, it would have been. I wasn't ready to be gay, Peter. I wasn't ready to want you the way I did. So I convinced myself that if I could make you the enemy, if I could make you hate me, then maybe I could hate you too and make it all go away. I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed. This is insane. You're telling me that our entire history is based on you being afraid of your own feelings. I'm telling you that I was a scared kid who handled his sexuality in the worst possible way, and you paid the price for it. He came back to the table, sitting down across from me. I'm telling you that I've spent the last 10 years trying to become someone worthy of your forgiveness, even though I never thought I'd be brave enough to ask for it. And now I'm here, sleeping on your couch, cooking you breakfast every morning, and falling for you all over again. Only this time, I'm not 18 and scared. This time, I know exactly what I'm losing if I don't tell you the truth. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Everything I thought I knew about our past was crumbling, being rebuilt into something entirely different. The boy who had made my life miserable had been fighting his own battles, and somehow, impossibly, those battles had been about me. I need some air, I said finally, standing up. Peter, please don't. I'm not leaving, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. I need to think. This is a lot to process. He nodded, looking defeated. I understand. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. Adam. Yeah. Thank you for telling me the truth, even if I don't know what to do with it yet. As I stepped outside into the cool morning air, I realized that everything had changed in the span of a single conversation. The man I'd been learning to care for was the same person who had caused me so much pain. But now I understood that his cruelty had been born from the same confused feelings that were currently tearing me apart. The question was whether understanding could ever be enough to bridge the gap between our past and whatever future we might have together. Subscribe if you believe in love that sneaks up on you. The day stretched endlessly before me, each hour dragging like I was walking through quicksand. I'd wandered the neighborhood for hours after our conversation, replaying Adam's words until they'd worn grooves in my mind. The coffee shop where I tried to think became too crowded, the park bench too exposed, and eventually I found myself back at my apartment building, staring up at my own windows like a stranger. Adam's silhouette moved past the curtains once, then disappeared, and I wondered if he was packing his things or just pacing the same way I was. When I finally climbed the stairs, my key felt foreign in the lock. The apartment was quiet except for the soft sounds of Adam moving around in the kitchen. I could smell something cooking, not breakfast this time, but something warm and comforting that made my chest ache with how domestic it felt. How had we gotten here? How had the person who'd made my college years hell become someone whose presence in my kitchen felt like home? Peter. Adam's voice was tentative, careful. I made soup. I thought you might be hungry when you got back. I stood in the doorway watching him stir a pot on the stove, his shoulders tense with worry. He'd changed into a clean shirt, and his hair was damp like he'd showered, but there were dark circles under his eyes that told me he'd spent the day in the same emotional turmoil I had. When he looked up at me, his face was raw with hope and fear. I wasn't sure you'd come back, he admitted quietly. This is my apartment, I said, then immediately regretted how harsh it sounded. I mean, I needed time to think. Adam nodded, turning back to the soup. I understand. I know what I told you was a lot to process. I know it doesn't change anything about how I treated you. I watched him move around my kitchen with the same careful attention he'd shown every morning, and something inside me finally shifted. Here was a man who'd been broken by his own fear, who'd lashed out at me because he didn't know how to handle what he was feeling. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it in a way that made my anger feel less like a burning coal in my chest and more like something I could actually examine. You're right, I said, and Adam's shoulders sagged. It doesn't change what happened, but it changes what it meant. He turned to face me fully, wooden spoon still in his hand. What do you mean? I took a breath, trying to find words for the realization that had been building all day. I spent years thinking you hated me, that I was somehow fundamentally hateable. Do you know what that does to a person? To think that someone can look at you and find you so repulsive that they need to make sure everyone else sees it too. Adam's face crumpled. Peter, I'm so sorry. I never meant. Let me finish. I held up a hand, and he fell silent. But knowing that you were cruel because you were attracted to me, it's not better, Adam. It's different, but it's not better. You still made choices. You still decided that your fear was more important than my dignity. You're right, he whispered. You're absolutely right. But, I continued, and saw his eyes flick up to mine with desperate hope. I've been thinking about cycles, about how pain creates more pain, and how someone has to choose to break that pattern. Adam set down the spoon, his full attention on me. What are you saying? I'm saying that holding on to this anger, letting it define how I see you now, would just be continuing the cycle. You hurt me because you were hurting. If I hurt you back because I'm hurting, where does it end? I don't deserve your forgiveness, Adam said, his voice breaking slightly. Maybe not, I agreed, and watched him flinch. But I deserve to let go of this weight I've been carrying. And you deserve a chance to be the person you're becoming instead of being trapped by the person you were. Adam stared at me for a long moment, tears gathering in his eyes. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet. I moved closer until I was standing just a few feet away from him. I need you to know something. These past few weeks, getting to know you, I've developed feelings for you. Real feelings. And that scares me more than anything else about this situation. Peter, Adam's voice was barely a whisper. I'm terrified that I'm being naive, that I'm falling for someone who hurt me because I want so badly to believe people can change. But I'm also terrified that I'll let fear keep me from something that could be beautiful. Adam reached out hesitantly, his hand stopping just short of touching mine. Can I tell you something? I nodded. Every morning when I cook breakfast, I'm trying to say all the things I don't know how to put into words. I'm trying to show you that I can be gentle, that I can take care of someone instead of tearing them down. I'm trying to prove to myself that I'm not the person I was in college. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. And somewhere along the way, I started falling in love with you. Not the idea of you, not some fantasy of redemption, but you. The way you hum when you're working. The way you always wash your coffee cup immediately after using it. The way you've shown me more kindness than I ever deserved. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Adam, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you, he continued. But if you're willing to try, if you think we could build something new together instead of being trapped by what came before, I promise you, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that chance. I looked at him standing there, vulnerable and hopeful and terrified, and realized that this was the moment. This was where I chose what kind of person I wanted to be. Someone who let past hurts dictate my future, or someone who believed in the possibility of transformation. I can't promise it will be easy, I said finally. I can't promise I won't have moments where I remember college and feel angry all over again. I understand, but I can promise that I'll try. We'll try together. I finally closed the distance between us, taking his outstretched hand. We'll figure out how to build something real from all this mess. Adam's fingers intertwined with mine, and for the first time since he'd shown up at my door, his smile was completely unguarded. Together? Together, I confirmed, and felt something that had been twisted tight in my chest finally begin to loosen. The next morning, I woke to the familiar sound of Adam moving around the kitchen, but something felt different. The air held a new kind of anticipation, like the moment before sunrise when the world holds its breath. I padded out in my pajamas to find him standing at the stove, shoulders less rigid than they'd been in weeks. Morning, he said softly, glancing over his shoulder with eyes that seemed clearer somehow. Morning. I settled into my usual spot at the small table, watching him work. The routine was the same: eggs, toast, coffee brewing, but everything had changed. Yesterday's conversation hung between us like a bridge we'd finally decided to cross. Adam set my plate down with extra care, his fingers brushing mine as he pulled away. Instead of retreating to his side of the table, he remained standing, hands gripping the back of the chair across from me. "Peter," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something." I looked up from my untouched breakfast, heart hammering. "Okay." He took a shaky breath, then slowly reached across the table. When I didn't pull away, he took my hands in his, and I felt the slight tremor in his fingers. "Every morning when I make you breakfast, I'm trying to say everything I can't find words for. Subscribe if you believe in love that sneaks up on you." His thumbs traced gentle circles across my knuckles. "I'm saying thank you for letting me stay when you had every right to slam the door in my face. I'm saying I'm sorry for every cruel word, every time I made you feel small, every moment I let my fear hurt you." His voice cracked slightly. "And I'm saying that somewhere along the way, standing in your kitchen, learning how you like your coffee, watching you work at that little desk by the window, I fell in love with you." The words hit me like a physical force. I'd been prepared for gratitude, maybe even an apology, but not this raw, complete honesty that left him utterly exposed. "Adam," I started, but he shook his head. "Let me finish. Please." He squeezed my hands tighter. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I spent years being the worst version of myself, and I can't undo that. But these mornings, making you breakfast, it's the first time in my life I've felt like I might be capable of gentleness. Like I might be someone worth caring about." Tears were sliding down his cheeks now, but he didn't let go of my hands. "I love the way you hum when you're concentrating. I love that you always say good morning to Mrs. Chun in the hallway. I love that you gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. And I love that you're brave enough to believe people can change." I felt my own eyes burning. "Adam, I love you," he whispered, and the words seemed to surprise him with their simplicity. "I love you, and I know it's complicated and messy and maybe impossible, but I had to tell you. I had to stop being a coward about the one thing that matters most." I stood up slowly, never breaking eye contact, and walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of him. His hands were still shaking as I reached up to cup his face, thumbs wiping away the tears on his cheeks. "I love you too," I said, and watched wonder bloom across his features. "I love the man you've become. I love your terrible jokes while you're cooking. I love how you always make sure I eat something decent. I love that you're trying so hard to be better." He leaned into my touch, eyes closing briefly. "Really?" Instead of answering with words, I kissed him. Soft at first, tentative, tasting salt and coffee and something that might have been hope. When he kissed me back, his arms coming around my waist, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adam rested his forehead against mine. "The breakfast is getting cold," he murmured. I laughed, surprising myself. "I don't care." 3 months later, I wake to the familiar sounds of Adam moving around the kitchen, and my heart still does that little skip it's done every morning since our first kiss. The breakfast tradition continues, but everything has changed. Adam found steady work at a local restaurant, and somewhere along the way, he moved from the couch to sharing my bed, though neither of us made a big announcement about it. It just happened naturally, like everything good between us. "Coffee's ready," he calls softly, and I pad into the kitchen to find him plating perfectly golden pancakes. The morning light catches the contentment in his face, and I'm struck again by how different he looks now. Relaxed, open, genuinely happy. We've built new routines together. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, where Adam gets excited about heirloom tomatoes and I tease him about his obsession with finding the perfect sourdough starter. Sunday cooking experiments that sometimes end in disaster and always end in laughter. Honest conversations about our ongoing growth, because we both know transformation isn't a destination, it's a daily choice. Last week, I introduced him to my friend Carl, and watching Adam navigate that friendship with genuine warmth instead of defensive walls felt like witnessing a miracle. He's been slowly rebuilding other relationships too, reaching out to people he hurt in college, not expecting forgiveness, but offering genuine apologies anyway. "What are you thinking about?" Adam asks, setting my plate down and settling beside me at our small table. Just this? I say, gesturing between us. How we got here? He reaches over to squeeze my hand. Best mistake I ever made, being an asshole in college. Don't joke about that. I say, but I'm smiling. I'm not joking, he says seriously. If I hadn't been so awful, you wouldn't have known what real change looks like when you saw it. I lean over to kiss him, tasting coffee and possibility. I love you. I whisper against his lips. I love you too, he whispers back. Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold. Some things, thankfully, never change.